Hello everybody, welcome to our program Face-to-Face Talk with ITSM Heroes. This is our second episode and today's guest for the program is Peter Brooks. Peter has 35 plus years of IT experience. He's from Cape Town, South Africa. Peter Brooks is an IT consultant, trainer, and an author of very well recognized books like Collaborative Consulting, published by TSO in 2013, Metrics for Service Management, Designing for ITIL, that's published by Van Haren Publications 2012, Metrics for IT Service Management, that's published by Van Haren Publications in 2006, and Integrated Requirements Process, that's published by ITSMF South Africa. So let's welcome Peter. Welcome to the program, Peter. Thanks very much for giving your valuable time. I'm really very excited and very happy to have you in this program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Look forward to a chat.
I'm super sure that my audiences would be loving me to bring you here. So no more blah blah from my side, and we want to listen from you now. So here we're going to start our discussion. So before we go ahead and talk about ITSM and all the other things. So first we would like to know about yourself first. So can you please tell me about yourself? How did you start your career, and then where did you start your career, and how did you get into IT service management?
Okay, well, briefly, I started off with Hewlett-Packard in South Africa, actually. I was there for a short while before I had to move to the UK because of apartheid. And I was with HP for 20 years, mainly in the UK after that, in different capacities. I did training, a little bit of development. I managed a team. And that's really how I got into service management. I had to manage an outsourced team that was running the network for Hertz Europe. It was back in the late 80s, so it was an X25 network. You don't see many of them today. But we were an outsourced, HP was the outsourced supplier. It hadn't really been done before, that sort of thing. So we had to start from scratch and learn from our mistakes. So when a few years later I discovered ITIL, I was delighted because it basically told me all the things I'd like to have known when I started.
Okay. So prior to HP, because didn't you work anywhere else? Was that your first company?
Well, I'd been at university before that. HP wasn't quite my first company because while I was at university, I was a barman. I worked in a bar in a hotel while I was studying. So I had 4 years as the barman, and then I joined HP. So a bit of a change of employment there. But yeah, it was my first real job.
Okay. So what really made you feel like, okay, ITIL is the domain, or IT service management is the domain that you would be grooming your skills, and then you would be adding value to this industry? What really made you feel that, okay, ITIL is that area where I'll have to stick into? And how did you?
I'd seen so many. As I said, I'd had this outsourced job where we had to put together the technical part of the network, we had to put together the support, we had to put together the operations. So I knew the various areas, I knew the difficulties, and I saw that ITIL had such a well-structured answer to those difficulties. And there was so much in IT, so much in companies that wasn't working. It was great to see something that could be used in order to fix a lot of these things. And I've continued with that view since then, that really the advice is so useful. It's great to bring it to people who are suffering from having to do everything from scratch. It's a way of really helping people understand how to go about things.
Okay, so I'm sure you should have seen ITIL V1, V2, and at least definitely yes, V1 and V2. So what do you just ask you? So when there was V1, ITIL V1, did you actually get to know about this thing called ITIL, and what was your opinion at that point of time when it was just in the stage of conception?
Well, at that stage, it was lots of books, tons of them. I
Mm.
forget how many, 30 or something. So I certainly didn't read all of them. I read one or two of the books, and each one was good in its own right. But obviously, there were lots of them, so there were elements of overlap between them. So I think it was a tremendous thing when they united that into the 7 books of ITIL version 2, because it made it a much more coherent structure. Before that, it had just been a book on networking, a book on support, a book on this, whereas then it became a more integrated structure. And the idea of splitting it into support and delivery was really good. The biggest issue I saw with ITIL version 2, because I really liked it, was people tended to think it was only those 2 books. So all of the other 7 books were ignored, really. Hardly anyone read them. And there was lots of very good advice. So ITIL version 3, bringing the life cycle in, I mean, that's got its own little difficulties. People think that everything has to be in its own little place in a life cycle, which is a little bit of a misreading of it. But at least now everybody sees all of the advice, rather than just looking at the 2 central books.
Correct. That's the best part. Even I like that. I agree that there were 7 or 8 books in V2, and all those areas, or all those ignored areas, like application management, and then information security management, and then technical management. All these things were, put in the right way in V3. In that life cycle module. That's really a very good thing which has happened in V3. So okay, can you actually, now we'll get more, we'll go more in detail about this ITSM process implementation and all. So can you please tell us what would be your approach for implementing ITSM process, or be it a function, in an organization?
Well, it's a good question, because you always know the answer from a consultant is it depends, unfortunately. But yeah, it depends on the organization. You'll have a very different approach for a small company, where you don't want to overload it with bureaucracy. And definitely the one thing that service management shouldn't be is a bureaucracy that causes more work. It should be something that helps people to do a better job. It doesn't get in the way. If it's getting in the way, it's not working. If it's a large company, then you have a very different approach. So, for example, in the case study in collaborative consulting, the company in that case study is a worldwide bank. That's already got some service management running in one part of the bank, and it talks about how you move that and all those processes across a bank that's made out of many countries, many different companies that have been merged into it, and that's one top-level approach. The other one is a small company which is just getting to the stage where individual relationships aren't enough, because there are too many people to maintain that informal basis, and they just need a bit of structure in order to grow a bit to the next level. And obviously there you're trying a minimal approach. In both cases, though, and this is why I think I was very keen to produce that book on integrated requirements, in both cases the most important thing is to understand what is important for that company, what's important for the business that they're doing. Once you know what's important and you know where the blocks are, that's where you start your work. Because that way you deal with the most important things first, you get quick wins that people can see are effective, and people can see a direct return on their investment. Once you've got that credibility from working in those first areas, you can then expand to other areas. But also, it's a good idea to do something that can tackle a real issue first. Some people have tried to go in and do help with service management by doing a big project. They want to, say, set up configuration management. So they go and sit in a room with a whole lot of database experts for 2 years, trying to produce the perfect config management. And every time I've seen that happen, after 2 or 3 years and several million or hundreds of thousands spent, the project is thrown away. You must do something tangible and practical that works, gets people involved, gets them enthusiastic, and then build on that. Going and building castles in the sky is of no use. Most of all, service management is meant to be practical. A lot of people have said it's really just applied common sense. And if common sense was as common as you'd like common sense to be, it probably wouldn't be necessary. But obviously, common sense isn't as common as we'd like it, and it really helps people understand how to get going, where to start.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, this is actually a very tricky question. There has been quite a lot of complaints on this area that ITIL doesn't, provide that demarcation between a process and a function. So, what is your opinion on it? I mean, see, in front of you, I hardly, I just have 12 plus years of experience. So I'm a neophyte in front of you. So for me, process and a function, with respect to that definitions, I understand what is a process and what is a function. But still, when I ask a question to myself, there is some kind of gray area. So what do you think? What is your opinion? When I ask you, okay, what's the difference between a process and a function? Do you think ITIL really provides that clear distinction between a process and a function?
Well, there are a few answers to that. I think the definition is quite clear, but I think getting too hung up on either processes or functions as things on their own can be a problem. You can design a really beautiful process that looks perfect on paper, that does everything you want. You can put together a team of people that are going to perform a particular function. You can have the best people in the world, but if you just do it in isolation and treat it as a theoretical entity, it's not going to work. The main issues you get are not with an individual process or function. The issues are in the overlap and the interaction. It's always at the edges. That's why if you have lots of individual functions dealing with each other or lots of processes interlocking, you start ending up with issues. So what you really want to do is look at the overall corporate process, value chain. What is it doing? It's making this and it's selling it to customers. Look at that big picture and then understand where you fit within that and work out what you need to do based on the business requirements. Then if you need some specific detail about a particular area, yeah, go and look at ITIL and see, okay, we're needing to deal with incidents or events, and you'll find very helpful advice to help you improve what you're doing. But to go and take it off the shelf and say, we're going to take ITIL incident management and force it on this organization, or we're going to go and take the service desk as described. And they don't just describe one service desk, they describe options, but don't just take one option and force it on your organization. That's the other way around. You see what you're trying to do, and almost everybody, even a fairly new site, is doing some of it already. So take what you're doing well, try and improve it, and use the function and process advice in order to build the capability. So if the advice says do this and that and it doesn't make sense to you, don't do it. Don't just do it because the advice says it. Do it because it makes sense and it works in your environment. The advice is there to help to guide you to improve things, not to try and enforce some law arbitrarily. If it worked for somebody else, it doesn't necessarily mean it worked for you. However, on the other side, if you're doing something and it's not working, and an ITIL book recommends you use a different process, it's not a bad idea to try that process that's worked well for other people and see how it goes, but not because you believe it to be some perfect answer. You have to adapt it and, as I always say, adopt it to your organization, adapt the way it works, and treat it practically if it works. And if it doesn't work for you, it's not the right answer. Even if the ITIL book says it is, what's important is it delivers value and works. So I'd say really that I wouldn't get too hung up about the difference. I wouldn't get too hung up about exactly what's meant by a process. I'd say make sure that what it means to everybody in the organization is understood. Because it doesn't really matter, and this is one of the advantages of ITIL, is it's got a series of words like that that at least gives you an idea what a process could or should be. As long as you're using the same language and everybody understands, you'll get somewhere. If everybody's got a different picture of how it should work, then it won't.
Okay. Okay. I have another question, with respect to the same thing, process and function. So, do you think can you call, these are the things which can be said as attributes for a function, and these are those mandatory attributes which can be said as, the characteristics or attributes for a process. Do you have any idea, or can you say, okay, these can be considered as the attributes for a process, and these are the things which can be considered as attributes for a function? Are there any such things, as per your opinion?
Oh, well, if you just want that difference, the simplest ones to me are just a function you have defined by the people in it. A process is a set of steps or stages. So you can automate a process. You can put a process into a computer program and run it. Now, a function is made up of a group of people. You can't automate a group of people, well, not yet, and not for some time. We haven't got robots that you can replace people with. So a service desk, for example, the one function we know about, is a group of people who are providing a service to the organization. How they provide that service is incident management, event management, problem management, all of those various areas. But their function, the function of a function, is a group of people who are trying to achieve something. Whereas a process is a set of steps that people are using to achieve something. So functions will always have processes within them. Processes will normally rely on functions to run. So some may not. I mean, when you go to an ATM machine, the whole process of your getting the money out is automated pretty well. So though there is a function operating, the function of giving you money, it's not actually people. It's a process running it.
Right. Great. Thanks very much for that detailed answer. I'm sure many of our audiences would have got that understanding now. What's the difference between a process and a function? Okay. So in your 35 plus years of experience, what was the greatest challenge that you have ever faced as an ITSM consultant? When you were doing the ITSM process implementation or ITSM process improvement or transition work. So and also, can you please share us how did you resolve them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'd say the most difficult ones are the ones where I didn't resolve them because they were too difficult to resolve. And sometimes something doesn't have a solution, and it's best not to try hitting your head against a wall. Again, in collaborative consulting, one of the things I try to emphasize is that it's not worth actually accepting some engagements. If a company is trying to, for example, get ITIL as a badge to say, we've got badge ITIL, but isn't interested actually in changing what they do, if you were not an ethical consultant, you could say, fine, I could take their money and I could work there for some time, but it's not going to succeed. It's not going to help their organization. In fact, if anything, it's going to make it worse because they'll think they're doing something that they're paying money for that should help them, and it's not. So what you should really do in those circumstances is say, look, I understand your issue, and if I was going to help you, we'd need to do this. But if it's not possible to do those things, really it would be better if we don't get involved. And you need to walk away from those, giving them advice, saying, look, if you don't get, for example, senior management support, if there's just one person on his own in an organization wanting to succeed in service management, and they've got no support from management, they're not going to get anywhere. Actually, and if they do go to get somewhere because they're enthusiastic enough, they're going to end up with it not working in the end. So the difficult thing is to say to someone, look, I'm sorry, we're not getting anywhere with this. And it's important to recognize that, and it's not just giving up. It's saying, look, until you have the right setup, you're wasting your time paying for me to get involved, or anybody else for that matter. You need to work out how this works, and then we can help. Again, it's necessary to have top-down support, and in some organizations there just isn't even the communication to start doing that. I've had the situation where I say to somebody, look, this is never going to work because these people aren't interested in being part of it. They tell you they don't want to be part of it, and you keep trying to get them to be part of it. And if you try and talk to senior management, you hear nothing. I say, well, who can help you with this? Well, we don't want you talking to the business. And you think, now, if you don't want me talking to the business, and they're the people you're working with, why are we doing this? So those are the difficult areas, and I think those are where you have to walk away. Areas where there have been solutions, potential. I'd say probably the most difficult technical one was when I was working for Samsung in South Korea. When they were setting up their pilot, they took Samsung Semiconductor and they asked HP to get a pilot going in Samsung Semiconductor. Now that was brilliant because the chairman of Samsung had said, we want this organization to use ITIL because it is the best practice we know. And once the chairman had said that and showed that he really supported that, everybody wasn't saying, why should we do it? They're saying, how should we do it? So you had people enthusiastic. They knew they had support. If they did it properly, that it would all be supported and work. It was brilliant that way. But they obviously came back and said, look, we want to be able to measure how things are going. Could you produce us a set of metrics so that we can measure how well we're doing in the different areas? I said, yeah, of course, that'll be fine. And I went off to look in the ITIL books, and then I went to go and look at the internet, and I found there were none. There was no set of metrics I could use to start working with them. So I had to write them all from scratch, and that was a lot of work thinking about the business, understanding how it worked, and that's what I did. I had to then write them from scratch, but then I thought, I don't want anyone else to have the same, know where to start. Obviously, you can't treat metrics as a magic spell. You can't get a set of metrics from someone else and shove them in. However, if somebody has worked out a set of metrics, you can use them as guidance to look at the sort of thing you could be doing and, again, adapt them to your organization. So that's why I wrote my first book, the Metrics for IT Service Management. I was essentially saying, if you end up at my position where you're helping an organization get its processes into place, take this book and it will give you advice on what you could do to get there, but don't treat it as magic. And don't just take it and apply it. Take it, think about it, and use it. And so, yeah, that was my solution to that one, was to try and turn it into a book afterwards.
That's great. Okay. Now, when now as we've just discussed about metrics, I have a question, and this question just rose up in my mind probably a couple of days back. When I was because even I'm an ITSM consultant, as you know, so I was in a discussion with one of my colleagues, and then we were in a kind of we were actually discussing what is process metric and what is operational metric. Is there anything like a process metric, and is there anything like an operational metric? So what's your opinion on it? As per my opinion, process metrics are those metrics which actually measures the effectiveness of a process, and operational metrics are those metrics which quantifies the efficiency or effectiveness of the operational environment. Like, for example, when I say, okay, I may be wrong here. Okay, I want your suggestion and I want your feedback on this. So, for example, on incident management, operational metrics for incident management would be something like the number of incidents and the time taken to resolve the incidents, and then all that NTRS, NTBSI, you come up with all those things. So these are something for me, operational. I would call them as operational metrics for incident management. And when I say process metric would be something like okay, let's say an audit has been done on a process, okay, and the auditor has figured out that this process is not really good. It has got some vagueness or some discrepancies in the process where it has got no clarity. So so those areas, those what do you call it, non-conformances as per the auditor, or that the areas for the improvement initiatives that he has figured out, and the number of defects that are there in the process, all these things would be called as process metrics as per my opinion. So this is my understanding, okay? Process metrics and operational metrics. Do you agree with this thing called process metrics and operational metrics, first of all?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you say, that's how you differentiate them. The way I'd look at it would be that when you're using any metric, you need to know why you're using it and what it's for. So ultimately, the metric that you're working towards is really an organizational KPI. What is the organization trying to do? If this organization is going to succeed, what must it do? So maybe it's profit, maybe it's market share, maybe it's excellence in its product quality. There could be a number of goals the organization has. When you then are handling incidents, you mentioned incidents, what matters is how much of those incidents impact that goal. So if the company is a manufacturing company and they're making cars, and these incidents are causing them to ship 20% fewer cars than they could be doing, that is the impact. That's the measurement that's important. If the incidents that are causing that breakdown are causing that effect on the business, that's what you have to work at. So your operational metrics should be focused on what the business process is, and the priority and importance of your incidents is based on that. Now, if the reason that you can't solve those incidents is because whenever you have an incident, you have to get approval from this person or pass it to that person, as you say, those are process errors. And the reason they're important is because they're slowing down and interfering with your operational success. If you come into an organization as an auditor and you look at the process and you see, well, the way this process works is that this person apparently looks at the same incidents as that person. This looks like a waste. It's a process issue. That's actually wrong, because you need to understand why two people are looking at it. It looks like it's inefficient, but let's say it was that example I spoke about, where these incidents were slowing down your manufacture. The first person might be looking at the incident just to do the work of getting it going, and the next person might be doing the work of looking at, as we know, the underlying problem. So it looks like two people are looking at the same thing, but actually they're doing different work that are both going to contribute to the organization's effectiveness. So the measure of whether the process is effective, the metric, is how well it delivers the operational result. There's no point in having a perfect process where every step makes sense if the outcome, what it does for the organization, isn't good. Then it's not perfect. So the only real measure of a process is it delivering? Now, if you find within the process there's something that's causing it not to deliver, that's a process defect. You need to measure it, you need to fix it, but only if it's causing an issue to your operational metrics. It's important always to look at the value that you're giving. So sometimes a very technical person or analytical person will walk in and say, look, all of your processes look a mess. That might be true, but if they're delivering a good result, don't break it. There's no need to fix it if it's working. If they're not producing a good result, then exactly work out where they're not and fix it. So I think that you shouldn't treat them in isolation. You should always treat them as they contribute to value, and normally you don't start looking at the process. You normally look at what it's doing, because if it's not doing well, then you look at the process and say, why not?
But in any best practice, be it ITIL or MOF or USMBOK or whatever it is, there is nothing like process metric. I mean, this artifact was not elucidated so big as it should be. Something like all they say is just metrics. That's it. But there was no. I got the answer. What you just said. We should not isolate this process metric and operational metric. I get that. But then this is why is this thing process metric not at all being focused by any best practice? Is it only just because these two metrics are the same?
No, I'd say it is focused. There are two places to look for metrics in the ITIL advice. The one is in service design, and the other is in CSI. Now, most of the focus, if you think about metrics, people look at CSI. How do we improve something? Look at the metrics and improve it. But that's actually not where the metrics are meant to be defined. They're meant to be defined back in service design. When you are designing a service, one of the things you design is the processes that are going to support the service. So that discussion I was just talking about, how does this process support the operational result we require from our service, is what should be considered as part of service design. And the service design book does discuss that, and does discuss how to measure the two. It doesn't give a lot of detailed metrics, but it describes where the metrics should be and how they should fit together. So I think it's worth looking at that book in more detail, there's a lot of information in service design that's very good in terms of designing metrics, because metrics is something that need design. You need to think about, what are we trying to achieve? Why are we measuring this? If you don't know why you're measuring something, you shouldn't be measuring it. You're wasting time and energy measuring it. But that's part of design. Design is saying, what are our requirements? Once you understand your requirements, how do we deliver to those requirements, and then how do we make sure that we have delivered? So that's why they wouldn't give a whole list of just a menu of metrics. They'd say, think about your metrics in terms of how does this process contribute to that. But yeah, if you look at what service design says, it says, I think it's 5 things you need to design. You need to design the service and so on and so on. But one of them is you need to design the metrics, and you need to design the processes. So metrics and processes are part of design. By the time you get to CSI, the assumption, and is wrong in most organizations, is that you've defined the metrics properly, and now you're looking at the metrics that you've already defined. So service design is, CSI is not the place where you should be designing new metrics. It shouldn't really have advice about the detail. The detail is part of how you design services in the first place, because that really is the big thing. Most services don't fail because there's a bad service desk. They don't fail because there's something wrong with the hardware. They don't fail because any of these root causes. The ultimate root cause is because they weren't designed effectively for what they were meant to be doing, delivering value to the organization. People often do something just because another company does it, or because everybody's doing it, or because it seems to make sense for some other reason. But it should, if you do something, it should be because you've understood the organizational value it's going to give, you've understood the requirements, and you fitted your solution to those requirements. One of the things that's not tightly embedded in ITIL advice is business analysis, and what I'm talking about is business analysis. It does exist in service design. There's a chapter talking about requirements engineering, but there's a huge area, the whole of business analysis, actually, that's out there that should be part of the process. In fact, there's a white paper Axelos asked Ivan McFarlane and myself to write. It should be coming out with the help of Debbie, her surname's just gone from me for a moment, an expert in business analysis. So it's a white paper discussing how business analysis and ITIL complement each other. And there's a lot on both sides that can help improve design of services, design of processes, and design of metrics. So again, the reason for my writing that book on an integrated requirements process was just this issue, that there is a disconnect between what business analysts do and what service managers do, and also what project managers do, because project managers also often look for requirements. They shouldn't be, but they do. So trying to move towards an integrated system where you don't have different people in different parts of the organization all looking for requirements from their perspective. You have one view of the overall organizational value governed by the board, and that then leads you to design services based on an understanding of those requirements.
Okay, that's great.
Does that make sense?
So this white paper that you just talked about, so when is it going to get published? Is it something which is going to happen in the next few days or months?
I think it should be in the next few weeks. I forget exactly where the discussion is at the moment. Okay. I think it was completed. It was completed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But Axelos, is producing a whole lot of white papers, and they have a schedule that I'm not privy to. You've seen them coming out, the various connections with different things, and that's part of that program. But I was mentioning it simply because I think it is a very important part that needs to be added and emphasized in service management. Design is crucial, and you don't just chuck metrics or processes or functions out there without thinking. They should be part of an integrated design, and for an integrated design, you need integrated requirements. And hence that book on integrated requirements.
Okay, that's great. So now I would like to know about your authoring works. So how did you actually, get the idea of writing your first book, and what made you write, this book?
Well, as I mentioned, it was the work I was doing with Samsung that, they needed metrics. I had to write them. I realized that there weren't any anywhere. So I then took the metrics I'd already written and went to Van Haren and said, what about a book? And they thought it was a great idea. So I didn't just obviously just produce the metrics. I was writing about the thought process you have to go through, the things to avoid, how to design them, and how to go about the whole process of measuring. Because measurement is not a substitute for management, and that's a danger, especially for technical people. They look at metrics and say, oh, wonderful, it's like a machine. You've got all these dials and you just, control it all through dials. But it's people, it's not a machine. And so metrics can only be there to help you managing people. They're not a substitute. So that was what the book was really trying to make clear. And the same with the second book on metrics, which was taking more of an ITIL version 3 view of it, and also taking more advice, again, on managing people and behavior and so forth, to make sure that when you did use metrics, they were for the service, not just the IT service, but the end-to-end business service. That's why it's not got IT in the title. It's about ITIL, but it's about ITIL applied to business services, not just IT services.
Okay. That's actually quite interesting. Then I would be very, I'll be very interested to look into this book, because this is that niche area that, everyone has to understand how to develop metrics. So I would definitely, have a look into this book.
Great.
Okay. Well, we have seen, so many ITSM best practices now, like ITIL, MOF, USM, BOK, and I don't know whether if I can say that as an ITSM best practice, but I would rather call it as a, best practice for IT governance, that is COBIT. So what is your opinion on them, and how different, how different are these things? I mean, how different are these best practices?
Oh, I think they all come at things from different perspectives, and the different perspectives are valuable. COBIT's origin in auditing gives a valuable idea. In fact, COBIT and ITIL, and as you know, the latest version of COBIT is based on the same structure as ITIL version 3, so there's a very strong connection. We were talking about metrics earlier, and of course COBIT does list hundreds of metrics for different things that you can use to understand an organization in a general sense. And again, they're useful too. Having a whole set of metric people put together, getting a feeling for the different areas is good. I think TOGAF is another area of advice that's extremely valuable, as is business analysis, BA-BOK, the business analysis book. Axelos also has some other advice that's really important, I think. MOR, the management of risk, because ultimately what you're trying to manage in services is reducing organizational risk. There's the management of value, MOV, which is to do with understanding where an organization needs to position itself in order to get value for its end customers. And there are also the other ones that there's management of portfolios, which I think is crucial, because in ITIL you have the service portfolio. That's only a portfolio. The ITIL service portfolio is really an IT portfolio looking at the business. And I believe that what really is needed is an umbrella to incorporate and integrate these as a view from the board. If you're running a company, you need to be able to look at the company and see how it's operating. And directors often find that very difficult. And something like TOGAF could be very helpful, but unfortunately it normally slots down under IT, and it's governed under IT governance. Similarly, COBIT is seen as IT governance, when really they need to see end-to-end service delivery and value. So what I've been calling it is service governance. And service governance is the board governing the services in the service portfolio. Part of that governance is governing the design of the service, governing the transition, all the things ITIL does, as well as governing the value. So service governance is look at services from not just IT, from an organizational perspective, and try and make sure each service gives you the best value for cost. And that's a way of, at the moment, boards often have to use a general ledger, accounting book to understand how an organization works. And that's fine if you're a finance person, if you're an accountant or something. For most people, it's just a whole lot of figures. But if you can see an organization by its services, what services come in this way, which services go out that way, how they integrate, and how well they do relative to each other, you can govern the organization better. So TOGAF would fit into designing that portfolio to fit the architecture. ITIL works by supporting the services from the point of view of transition and strategy, designing them from end to end. Business analysis fits in with that design, understanding the requirements. I mentioned the integrated requirements process. Really, you should understand your requirements across the board for the whole company. You shouldn't just be getting a requirement for this little project and then for that little project, because often, there are 100 projects, but they've all got similar requirements, and it's a waste of money to rediscover them all. Rather have one set of corporate requirements for your corporate services. So that's what I've been looking at recently is adopting service governance as your overall driver. ITIL advice is part of service governance. So is management of value, so is management of risk, so is management of portfolios, because this big service portfolio is a portfolio. It needs to be, the board invests in its services, and it invests in them just like it would a supply chain. A supply chain is a sort of service or set of services in just the same way. So I think all of these different forms of advice provide different parts of that jigsaw. And if you build them together and look at them as business services, and the job of the board is to govern them, you get over that bottom-up problem. Service management doesn't work if you haven't got senior management support. If the board is working for it to produce a governance of a portfolio, you've got that support already. You also then haven't got different parts of the organization fighting against each other. They're all part of the same integrated service portfolio. So rather longer answer to the question, but that's how I would see the different advice fitting together.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now, as we've just talked about governance, I have another question. Do you think ITIL doesn't provide that governance controls or that governance methodology in ITIL v3? Because for me, Corbett, now many consultants do quite a lot of gaga, saying that Corbett has got something extraordinary which wasn't there in ITIL. So I do not really understand what is that extraordinary part which is not there in ITIL. And when I ask me, can you please tell me what is that area or what is that thing which you did not find in ITIL, and then that you're finding something extraordinary in Corbett, then after discussing it for some 30 minutes or 45 minutes, then they come to say, oh yeah, correct, everything is there. It's only on all finally they again come to the conclusion, or they finally come to that conclusion that yes, Corbett is something like a, it's a good material. I definitely say it's a good material. It's a good material, with respect to that checklists,
Yes,
like
absolutely.
For an auditor, for example, let's say an auditor cannot go, read all that 1,500 pages of books which is there in ITIL v3. He cannot go and come up with all that checklist. But if you want it very handy, then the best source or the best material for me is go to Corbett, check that materials, and then go for doing your audits and all that. That's my opinion. What's your idea on this thing?
I agree with you completely. I think Cobit's value is exactly that, in providing checklists for IT in order to understand it. There is more. Now ISACA is producing excellent guidance on various areas. So it's done a book on security and so on, but it's also helpful from an audit perspective. Sorry?
What was that? SOX? Did you say SOX?
No, security.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Sorry.
Isaka,
Oh,
ISACA,
Saka.
the people who produce COVID, Isaka, yeah.
Okay.
They have produced some good advice, and they've produced quite a lot of books. And as an organization, I think Isaka's got a lot going for it. It's a very energetic organization. They produce lots of new material. They engage with their membership a lot. And I think that's part of the reason for the enthusiasm around COVID, because it's so well supported by Isaka. People are keen on it. But I'd agree with you. I'd say that it's got a very important place, and the checklists are excellent. But the advice that you need to follow is in ITIL or one of the other books, Management of Value. And in terms of governance, governance is more than just checklists. It's more than just rules. It's more even and just policy. Governance actually means that the governing body of an organization, and it depends on the organization. If it's a university, the governing body is the Senate. If it's a commercial company, it's a board of directors. In the Nordic companies, they often have independent governing boards that do it in a different way. It doesn't matter who's doing the governing, but that body needs to to govern. There's an important difference, to govern the services, making sure that what's delivered is what's required for the corporate vision, the corporate charter, for what the governing body is trying to achieve, whatever that governing body is. So something like COVID helps with compliance. Are we doing what we should do? But that's only one small part of governance. Governance is not just, are we complying with rules, but are we achieving inventiveness? Are we achieving new design? Are we growing in new markets? Are we doing the best we could do with our management? And that level of governance, I think ITA helps with a lot. Service strategy provides a lot of very useful advice on how to build strategies, which some of that is for management. Some of it is governance at a board level. The advice crosses both domains, but the emphasis on, and this is why I think service governance is so important, that the board should be looking at ITIL as being the engine that allows you to achieve service governance for all services, not just IT. I mean, a lot of people are using ITIL advice for non-IT stuff because it is good advice about services. It's not just good advice about IT. One of the best examples was in Switzerland. The you know, they got that big cyclotron thing, atom smasher. You know, they're looking for the Higgs boson. Well, building that infrastructure for CERN was a massive job. And the guy in charge of building the infrastructure, that huge big underground tunnel, all of those magnets, a massive, massive, massive job, used ITIL for the job. Hardly any IT involved, but he used ITIL because it gives you the tools. It was a well-governed operation. The physicist said, this is what must be done. The engineers then used ITIL advice to set strategy, do the design work, do the transition, manage the events and the operation. It's a really brilliant framework for doing all of that. And I think it's a pity. I mean, IT is now so important and integrated that it, you know, it's really important, but there's more to life than just IT. And really, ITIL covers a lot more than that. But I think bringing it under the umbrella of governance is crucial for success in the future.
Okay, that's great, Peter. So I have another question, a very different question. So I'd like to know the best practices, okay? Best practices for implementing an ITSM tool. Okay, let me ask you this question first. When should an organization think of implementing an ITSM tool?
Well, firstly, I'd like to refer to the best book on the subject, which is by Robert Falkovits. I don't know if you know it. Robert Falkovits has written a book called How to Choose a Tool for the Business When the Business is IT. And it's all about what you need to do for tool selection. Really, really good, very thorough book. So if you're ever with someone doing it practically, I'd get a copy of that book and use it. But from the top level, people should not start thinking about a tool anywhere near the beginning. is the easy answer. Far better if you're setting up a new process to do something, use what you've got. Use a piece of paper, use an Excel spreadsheet, use something to get it going. Don't rush off and buy a tool that's been designed for somebody else to do other things. When you know what you need from using simple tools, then look at tools knowing your requirements. Because the danger is that the tail wags the dog. You know, you think, oh, we need service management. You go and get a service management tool, and it forces you to do things, not because they're the best for you or the best for you now, but just because that's the way the tool works. And that can waste a lot of time and energy. So I'd never start with it first. Having said that, one of the tools I found most valuable, it is one that's not a service management tool at all. And that's, you know, Wikipedia, of course. Well, Wikipedia is not governed in the way you'd want most companies to be governed, but the underlying engine is a thing called MediaWiki. And obviously, because it's running underneath Wikipedia all the time, it's very reliable code. And part of it is a thing called the Semantic MediaWiki, SMW. Well, the Semantic MediaWiki allows you to put together, I mean, I was working with this organization recently, and they needed an incident management system. So I looked at what they needed, and I was able to use Semantic MediaWiki to produce a form that did what they wanted, to report it, that did all the other stuff quite quickly and easily. And obviously that meant they could use it, and if it didn't do what they needed, it was easy to change to do something else. So it was quite possible to run the whole process just with a few forms in MediaWiki. Now, obviously, if you had a team of 30 people in a service desk, you'd need to do a lot more than that. This is for a very small organization. But it allows you to create tools yourself, or with a little bit of technical help, very quickly and easily, and throw them away if they're no good and replace them with another. If you go and buy an expensive tool for your organization, you may find that a lot of stuff you're not going to use for a long time. So you're paying for something you don't need. And it also leads you in a direction you don't want to go. So rather do it yourself quickly, easily. Use something like MediaWiki, which is free as well. And when you know what you really need, then you can use that, along with Robert Falkowitz's book, to decide what tools to get.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. I will definitely have a look into that book. So now I would like to know, as per your experience, what do you think, you know, is this ABCs for ITSM, the attitude, behavior, and culture, and why do you think it's really very important in, you know, in managing your IT services very effectively?
It's essential. Organizations are made up of human beings. And if you don't treat human beings as human beings, if you treat them as something else, it's not going to work. And we've got lots of evidence it doesn't work. And ITIL does give lots of very good advice about that. A lot of people read the Service Transition book just to look for change and release management. But there's a lot of really good advice in that about organizational re-engineering management. In particular, the most important part is covered in all the ITIL books, which is communication. The best way to manage ABC is honest communication, which means both ways. It's not sending messages out to tell people what to do. It's listening to what people have to say and responding. Two-way communication. And all of the ITIL books emphasize a communication plan again and again and again and again. And it's not there just for fun. It's not there just because they say so. It's there in order to make sure that people know what you're doing, understand what you're doing, have an opportunity to tell you if you're doing it wrong, so you can make sure that they are with you in what you're doing. So communication is absolutely essential to ABC. It's embedded in it, and unfortunately what a lot of people do is they say, oh, that's a great idea, we'll communicate. Then once they get busy, they forget to communicate, they get all absorbed in their task, and as far as the rest of the world is concerned, they've disappeared. So a communication plan needs to be a proper plan, like any other plan, saying this is what we'll do on these dates. So in 6 weeks' time, we will meet these people, we will discuss where we've got to and what we're doing, and then somebody runs that plan to make sure all of the milestones, everything in that plan is complied to. So you don't just say you communicate, you have a communication plan, and you make sure that somebody drives that plan, so you are communicating both ways, so you don't end up getting off track and everybody else knows what you're doing. That's only part of the advice, obviously, but I think it's the crucial one. It doesn't matter how brilliant your organization plan is, or how wonderful your objectives are, or how great your process design. If people don't know what you're doing and they can't respond to what you're doing, forget it. It's of no use at all. So really, that I think is the biggest lesson. And as you read the Itsm books, it comes through again and again and again and again that communication is essential.
You're right. Okay, I want to ask a question on the current happening or the latest trend, that is DevOps. So what do you think DevOps is, and how do you think ITSM can get that advantage out of DevOps methodology?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. DevOps is a great idea. It's an important thing addressing an issue that very often organizational value and development are a long way away from day-to-day operations. And absolutely, to have a much closer relationship in terms of understanding value, in terms of understanding each other, communications, all of that is really important, that there are good links between development and operations. So all of that is great. It's important to, I think, understand what DevOps is not saying. It's not saying that you should forget about organizational requirements. Some people think, oh great, that means that we can just talk to operations, we can produce whatever we think is a good idea in terms of new code, and off we go. Well, no, because if you do that, you're going to end up with all sorts of stuff that doesn't actually comply or fit with what the organization is trying to do. So there has to be a strong tie-in between understanding the value and the requirements. And though the method of working closely with operations is really important, both operations and development must understand what the organizational requirements are. And when there are detailed requirements, technical requirements, make sure those requirements fit with it. So again, I believe that what DevOps requires to work well is what I was talking about before, an integrated requirements process. So you understand what all the organizational requirements are, you can add new ones, you can fit them in the framework. So DevOps can still work quickly, but if they discover a requirement, they don't just discover it, put it in code and shove it out there. They document it so it's part of the known requirements of the organization. So in order to they to come and say, well, why does it do this here? And they can say, well, it does that there because of that requirement. And that requirement fits into corporate requirements and so forth. So I think it's brilliant, but the dangers are people misunderstanding it and not incorporating it in a proper requirement structure. I think ITIL has already been saying a lot of what DevOps is. It's encouraging the same thing. It doesn't cover development a lot, but it definitely wants development to understand and work with and communicate, as I was saying earlier, with service management.
Okay. Now here I have a point. DevOps approach is all about creating that culture so that communication is happening properly between dev and ops, so that there is no gaps. So I'm actually, to be frank enough, I'll tell you, I'm a great fan of ITIL. So for me, DevOps is not something new, which is not there in ITIL, because service strategy, service design, and then probably we had something called SLP, service level package, which was like a deliverable from service strategy, which is going to service design. And then we have another deliverable called SDP, service design package, and then that goes to service transition. So we have that thing which is actually trying to connect all these 5 layers, okay, or 5 books: strategy, design, transition, operations, and CSI. So DevOps, how do you think this DevOps approach is really going to provide that extraordinary value and change, things tremendously? Because even ITIL has got that things where that, okay, I agree with this area that the communication is not happening from operations to service design or transition, but yes, maybe CSI can do that, continual service improvement, or probably, yeah, design coordination can also do that. Service in service transition, TPS, transition planning support, can also do that. That is, getting the inputs from operations to service transition, or from getting the inputs from operations to design coordination. Even that can be done, right? So,
Yes.
yeah. So, what's your opinion on this?
No, I agree completely. It can be done, and it is there, absolutely. The issue is, again, how people go about implementing service management. If they do it in an inflexible way, where they treat each stage as being a whole bureaucratic process, so you have to have a whole lot of sign-off between each level, and it's important that it's secure and it works and it's available, but if it slows everything down, so when you discover a requirement late in the process, and you always will, it's very difficult to go back and put it back into the SDP, the service design package. Now, I think the service design package is a wonderful thing. It's a great idea, but it shouldn't be a static package that's created and designed and then just travels to operations. It should be an interactive thing that contains information about the service as it is now. Design doesn't just happen at the beginning of the service. It can happen much later on. You can discover new requirements you need to incorporate. That will happen. You don't just say, sorry, we've done our design and it's finished. You say, okay, here are some new requirements. You can add them to the requirements register, which is connected to the SDP, and you can then use them to develop new stuff. So what tends to happen is people have, because normally they use something like database technology. So an SDP might be a database, or even worse, it might be a Word document, or some very static object. It's quite difficult to change that design document later on, which is why the idea of a wiki appeals to me, because your design document is still auditable. Every change, when it happens, is automatically audited. You always know who made the change and where, so you're not throwing away rigor. But if you need to add a new requirement 3 weeks before release, and it's really crucial, you can add it to the design document. You can then start working with your design to see how to fit it into your design, and if possible, I mean, you may not be able to, you may have to put it off to phase 2. That's life. But if you can fit it into the existing design, you don't throw it away, you will, and you will be flexible. So I think you're quite right. ITIL has got everything, but the way it's often been implemented as a whole series of documents, and TOGAF has the same problem too. They often design massive documents that nobody ever reads, and they get out of date very quickly because they put them in a that rubbish dump. What's it called? Microsoft has a name. SharePoint. Just a dump where stuff is chucked. It's of no use as a management tool. It's a mess. So as long as you're using that, forget it. You're never going to be able to manage things effectively. However, with proper version control, which you can get with a wiki, where you're not managing a document, you're managing a page of content. So you're managing a requirement, or you're managing a design spec, you're managing part of it. There you can have it updating. So I think, yeah, and it's an odd answer, because before I say you don't start with a tool, but often I think in this case tools get in the way of enabling ITIL processes because they force too much bureaucracy on them. The processes must be there in order that things can be audited and that they are governed, but they mustn't be there to slow stuff down. And I think DevOps is to some extent a reaction not against ITIL or even or service management. It's a reaction to rigid bureaucratic approaches to doing it. And if you remove that rigid bureaucracy, I think DevOps will be quite happy with what's being done, and everyone will be happy with DevOps, because I agree with you completely. From the point of view of description, it's not telling you anything new. But when you start looking at the way tools work, and you look at the horrible things people have to work with, you understand why they say, look, let's just get rid of that. Let's just work with operation directly, because they don't want to read through 1,000-page documents, that haven't been properly updated and all of that. So, yeah, it's an implementation and documentation issue rather than an issue with ITIL. I'd agree.
Yeah. Okay. And this is my final question. Thank you very much. I think I'm taking too much time of yours. So
No,
I
no
would like to
problem
know,
at all.
yeah, we would like to know what is this new thing happening called, SIAM, SIAM. Can you please explain us what this thing is and how different is it from supplier management?
Well, I'm obviously not an expert. I can't give a definitive answer at all. But just from my understanding and my approach, I think it's an excellent idea, because what it's doing is it's understanding that there's a big difference between managing, as I was saying earlier, an end-to-end service across an organization to deliver value, and getting a supplier in to do a job and then go away. Supply management is important, and it's a great thing and necessary, but its emphasis is on the supplier as an external, simply supplying stuff to you, a very one-way link. When you're delivering complex services, you really want your suppliers to be part of a partnership that share the same goals and responsibilities as you do. You can never outsource accountability. So you always, as an organization, have to be accountable for what goes on, but you can outsource responsibility. When you take on suppliers in an integrated fashion, because really what CM is saying is it's saying a lot that's been said before. It's saying you need a program to manage it. So that the CM organization is a program, as you'd see described in MSP, Managing Successful Programs. It's a program that looks at all of the services, not just from the point of view of these are internal, those are external, but how does the whole end-to-end thing work? And if there are multiple people supplying different parts, how are they managed under their objectives, their measures, their requirements? And if one is going to be replaced with another, how do you do that in a seamless way? So I think it's brilliant. It's using program thinking. It's looking at an integrated value chain, and it also deals with things like insourcing and outsourcing as non-issues. You know, if it makes more sense for something to be handled outside, you can move it outside. More sense to have inside, based on the requirements of the service. So if something is a highly confidential service, you might not want to have end suppliers having access to the clear text. That just becomes clear as part of service management. So. Yeah, as we were saying, a lot of these things aren't new, I mean, and they're common sense, but it brings a lot to what's being talked about in saying, if you understand things in an integrated, that word integrated is important. The book I wrote, Integrated Requirements Management, is the same thing. It's saying you must integrate your services across the organization. They're saying just the same. You must integrate the services. You can outsource even that integration to another organization. Not the accountability for it, but the responsibility for it. So another organization can deliver a block of services that are managed over time to fit in with your requirements. I think it fits very closely with service governance, and that effectively what you're saying is that SIAM is the program team that manages the service portfolio. And the service portfolio isn't, of course, just internal or just IT services. It is all services the organization consumes, all services it delivers, and all internal services, and how they relate to one another. And it's doing exactly the work that needs, and it's being very successful. So I would say it's really an application of ITIL, an application of service management in very complex environments. That's absolutely right. It's doing good stuff, and I'm sure, and I know it is happening in places. Bringing more of that thinking into ITIL, into service management, makes sense. So it's more available to other people.
Okay. That's great, Peter. Thank you very much. Actually, it was really a fantastic session. You know, frankly speaking,
nice chat. Thank you. It's interesting.
Yeah, I have got quite a lot of information from this discussion, and I'm sure also my audiences, have got should have got enlightened with lots of stuff. So thanks a lot. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for this discussion, Peter.
No problem. All the best. Thank you for the opportunity to chat. It was good.
Thank you. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks. Bye.